Knowles. I am the fire safety educator here at the Brantford Fire Department, and I've been doing it for a little over a year now. I think when a lot of people hear the fire department, they immediately think firefighters, but we have lots of different positions here at the Brantford Fire Department. So when we think about keeping our community safe, there is 3 lines of defense in the fire service. The first one is public education. That's what I do. The second one is fire prevention. So that is our officers who go around and do inspections to enforce the Ontario Fire Code, which is a very important piece of legislation that we use to enforce the safety measures required in buildings. And then there's suppression. So my position as a fire safety educator is very proactive. And I think it's very underrated. The more that I can do my job and educate the community on the ways to stay safe at home, the way that they can prevent incidents from happening in the first place, the easier the firefighters' jobs become. So as an example, the more I can teach people how to escape in a fire, that means our firefighters don't have to run into burning buildings to save someone. So my job is really important because not only am I improving the life and safety of the community, I'm also making sure first responders can do their jobs more safely as well. So I'm really lucky to be in this position. I really enjoy it, and I have lots to teach you today about fire safety in the kitchen. Unfortunately, I won't be able to take questions during the presentation, but I'm excited that we'll be able to get to talk and interact afterwards. So I wanted to start off with the facts. What are the facts? Why is this presentation important to you today? Well, the first fact is that older adults are at a higher risk of death or injury as a result of fire. And the statistics are that by age 65, older adults are 2 times as likely as compared to the general population to be injured or killed as a result of fire. By age 75, that grows to 3 times as likely. And by age 85, that's 4 times as likely. And I don't know about you, but I really don't like those statistics. And it's part of my job to work with you to change those things. The second statistic is that the majority of structure fires occur in the home. And actually, as of the 2020 statistics, 73% of fires that occurred across the province were residential. So that means in people's homes. The leading cause of these fires is cooking related. So that's why this presentation is really important today, because the top ignition source or reason that these fires happen was cooking related. And the truth is that many of these fires could have been prevented. So my goals of the presentation today are to teach you about the basics of fire prevention. We'll talk about staying safe in the kitchen specifically in regards to fire prevention, and then a little bit about some additional safety measures that we can take to stay safe at home. So what is fire? So if we had to get an actual definition, fire is a rapid oxidization process, which is a chemical reaction resulting in the evolution of light and heat in varying intensities. So when I teach this to the kids, I like to say fire is actually science, which it is. But we take it down to the very basics, and we like to teach what we call the fire triangle. And the fire triangle tells us that in order for fire to happen, 3 elements need to be present in the right quantities at the same time. So these 3 elements are heat, fuel, and oxygen. So there are many heat sources in our kitchen and around the home in general. So heat source is something that raises a fuel to its ignition temperature so that it can burn. In our kitchen, we have stovetops, we have ovens, we have toasters, toaster ovens, microwave. All these things are potential heat sources that, if we're not careful, could start a fire. So that's the first thing fire needs in order to happen. The second thing is a fuel source. Fire needs something to burn. And the ultimate truth is that if you get anything hot enough, almost anything will burn. But in our kitchens, there are lots of combustible items like oven mitts or tea towels. The food itself that we're cooking is a possible fuel source that could catch on fire. Our clothes, our cabinets are often made of wood or synthetic materials. So there are lots of fuel sources that exist when we are in the kitchen. The third thing that fire needs to happen is oxygen. And oxygen is all around us. So it's really hard for us to control that variable of the fire triangle. Something additionally I would like to point out here is medical oxygen. There is a higher risk of a fire in environments where medical oxygen is present. And that's because when the medical oxygen is in use, it creates an environment that's oxygen rich, more so than it would be in general. So this means that if a fire were to happen in an oxygen rich environment, it would burn hotter and it would burn faster because it's got lots stimulating that chemical reaction. It also means fire can just happen easier. So we need to be very aware in environments where there is medical oxygen in use and take additional safety precautions or just be extra careful to avoid starting a fire. So I'm just going to give you, a few examples of possible fire triangles that exist in the kitchen and how we can use the fire triangle to prevent these fires from happening. So just as a reminder, we need the heat, something to make it hot. We need fuel, something to burn, and we need oxygen, which is all around us in order to start a fire. So do you see a fire triangle in this picture? We have a heat source, we have the stovetop, we have fuel, we have our tea towel that was left too close to the burner, and we have oxygen all around us. Here is a fire triangle that easily could have been prevented by keeping the tea towel away from the stovetop. As another example, is there a potential fire triangle here? Absolutely, there is. We have a heat source, our toaster. We have something that can burn, our toast, and we have oxygen all around. So there, there's the toast is not on fire here, but there would be potential. If you're like me, I like my toast nice and brown. So usually I have to put it down for a second time, but I have to keep an eye so I don't burn it or set it on fire. This is lived experience. So when it comes to fire prevention, it's really all about habits. And a habit is a settled or regular tendency or practice. So if we have good habits, we are well on our way to preventing fires from happening in our homes. And just as something to mention, that fire triangle and the examples I showed you, they extend into our homes in other ways. Things like fireplaces are heat sources, or space heaters or candles. So what I just showed you about the fire triangle in the kitchen is super applicable to every other area of your home as well in preventing fires. All right, so I'm going to share with you some fire prevention tips or habits that really help in the kitchen specifically. So my first tip is to dress the part. Our clothes are a potential fuel source that could burn in the kitchen. We like to recommend that you wear tight fitting sleeves, or you roll up loose sleeves, or simply just wear short sleeves in the kitchen. And that's because while we're working in the kitchen, we're often reaching over burners, across the hot things, and we can accidentally set our sleeves and our clothes on fire. As a friendly reminder, stop, drop, and roll is the age-old saying for what to do if your clothes catch on fire, but it really, really holds true today. If we were to perform stop, drop, and roll, what we would actually be doing is we would be taking away the oxygen element in the fire triangle. Because when your body is against the ground, there's no oxygen that can get in there. So that's actually what we're doing when we're doing stop, drop, and roll, is we are smothering the fire by taking away the oxygen. I never thought I would ever have to stop, drop, and roll, but I actually worked at a restaurant once where they had a flaming cheese dish. And when I did the flaming cheese, I actually lit my whole hand on fire. And really it was the alcohol on my hand that was on fire. So luckily I didn't get burned, but I smothered the fire between my body and the wall, getting rid of the oxygen and putting out the fire. Now, I was lucky I didn't get burned in that situation, but if you are to experience a burn in the kitchen, what you can do is gently run the cold water from your tap and run your burn under that for at least 5 minutes. And what that will do, and what water is really great at doing, is absorbing heat. It will take a lot of the heat out of your burn. And that's actually when firefighters put water on a fire, they are actually cooling it down so it can't burn anymore. All right, tip number 2 is keep it clear. So we looked at our fire triangle examples and we saw that a tea towel on the stove could catch on fire. So we want to keep the hot things away from the things that can burn in our fire triangle in order to avoid starting a fire. So keep your stove tops clear while you're using them, or even while they're off, to be honest, of anything that can burn. Keep an eye on what you're cooking, and as long as you can keep those combustibles out of the way, you will be well on your way to preventing a fire in the kitchen from starting accidentally. Linda gave us a real life example of something that happened to her recently with a tea towel that she was using to drain a pot, and that tea towel accidentally touched the rear burner and it started smoking. So these things can happen really easily. So again, a good habit, keep your combustibles away from the stovetop. I also mentioned, even when it's off, there are instances where, I've gone to clean the knobs on my stove and I've accidentally turned on one of the burners. So if you're storing things on your stovetop, and you accidentally turn on a burner, not realizing it, you could start a fire completely by accident that way. Or, if you have a cat, pets, or even dogs jumping up on the stove have been the cause of a fire before because they've accidentally turned on a burner. So keeping your stovetop clear while it's in use, or even when it's not in use, is a really great habit to be in. All right, tip number 3 is to be alert. We have had lots of fires in the past where somebody has been cooking under the influence of something. So we often talk about alcohol, and that is really important. We do not recommend drinking and cooking, as well as any medications that might cause drowsiness or impairment. So try to be cognizant, because even alcohol and medications can have really negative interactions. So we like to recommend saving the delicious glass of wine that you've chosen to go with your meal until you're finished cooking, or being aware of if somebody is cooking and drinking, to keep an eye on that situation. It's just really important. We've had folks who have gone and started something on the stove and then they've fallen asleep and they wake up and their home is on fire. So it's really scary. We don't want that to happen. So be alert while you're cooking. And if you're feeling not so alert, perhaps, ordering in or something snacky would be the better option. Tip number 4 is look when you cook. Unattended cooking is the leading cause of cooking fires. People who walk away forget what's on the stove, and things can get out of hand really quickly. So my biggest advice here would be, if you have to leave the kitchen while you are cooking, stovetop in particular, turn off the heat. Take away the heat element of the fire triangle, maybe even take it off the burner as well, so you don't get distracted and start a fire. A really good example of that, we had a fire in Brantford where a woman was cooking in the kitchen. She heard a knock at the front door, so she went to answer it. And when she answered the door, it happened to be a friend of hers who brought over an album full of wedding pictures for them to go through. So if my friend popped over into that, I would love to see the photos. And she just got distracted and forgot that she was cooking in the kitchen, and actually her husband came in the back door to find that the pot of food was on fire. So look when you cook. If you can't, take that heat element away, turn off the burner and turn it back on when you return to the kitchen, because it's very, very easy to get sidetracked. Tip number 5, set a timer. So there's lots of, methods of cooking where maybe it's low and slow. So whether we're, baking in the oven or braising in the oven, maybe we're using a crock pot, set a timer to remind yourself. Again, it's, maybe we're not going to stay in the kitchen for 2 hours while we're braising something in the oven. And we might go about, the rest of our chores. Set a timer to remind you that it is in there. Same kind of things apply as the look when you cook. You might get distracted. So have a reminder for yourself that you were making dinner. In fact, not only do you not want to burn your dinner, because that is very disappointing when that happens, but we also don't want to start a fire. So, timers like the one pictured here. I like to use the one that's directly on my stove or the microwave, or even sometimes I set one on my cell phone to remind me that I have something in the oven. All right, my next piece of advice is to put a lid on it. So when we're cooking stovetop pots or pans, we want to make sure when we are taking out our whatever we'll be cooking in, that we have a snug fitting lid as well. Keep that out, keep that handy, keep that right beside the stove. And this is because if we were to have a fire on the stovetop, we don't want to use water to put it out. That's because we often cook using oils, and we know that water and oil does not mix, particularly when everything is nice and hot. When water gets hot, it turns into steam. So if we were to put water on a grease or a cooking fire, what would happen is it would hit the hot oil, turn into steam, and spread that flaming hot oil everywhere. Not to mention the steam can burn as well. So if we were to have the fire in the pot, we would take that lid and we would slide it very carefully over top. If we did that, what we would be doing is taking away the oxygen. This is one of the few scenarios where we can actually control the oxygen side of the fire triangle, because once that lid's on and it uses up the oxygen inside the pot, the fire will go out. Step number 2 there is to turn off the heat source as well. Turn off the burner, take away the heat, take away the oxygen, and you will really quickly put out that fire. So say you don't have a tight fitting lid for whatever pan or pot you're using, a cookie sheet actually works the exact same way by putting that on top. So no worries if you don't have the correct lid. There are other options as well. So I actually have a video to show you demonstrating what I've just talked about as far as putting a lid on it is concerned.
Cooking fires are the #1 cause of fires in the home and fire injuries, but you have the tools in your home to be able to put a pan fire out very quickly and safely. Let's watch. Your food catches fire. Don't panic. Pick up the lid. Simply suffocate the fire by sliding the lid over it.
Oh.
Searching for a better way to collaborate with your team?
I'm sorry, we just have to watch the ad quickly.
Cooking fires are the #1 cause of fires in the home and fire injuries, but you have the tools in your home to be able to put a pan fire out very quickly and safely. Let's watch. Your food catches fire. Don't panic. Pick up the lid. Simply suffocate the fire by sliding the lid over it. Turn the heat off. Getting everyone outside, out of the fire, calling 911, let the fire department come in and do their job. Say you don't have a lid, cookie sheet can work just the same. You have a fire inside the oven, same concept. Close the door, do not open it. You want to suffocate the fire and turn it off. So remember, whenever you're cooking, always stay in the kitchen and keep an eye on it. I'm Elise Weintraub Brown with Palm Beach County Fire Rescue. Your safety, our priority.
So as you could see in the video, exactly what I was just talking about. So I think it's a really great visual. And she also included the oven in there. If there's an oven fire, just leave that door closed, turn off the heat, and the fire will go out pretty quickly once it doesn't have the heat and the oxygen anymore. So my next tip is use oven mitts and have those handy. So I don't know if you noticed in the video, but when she slid the lid over the pot, she actually had her hands covered with oven mitts. And oven mitts that kind of come up your forearm are really great too, because then you're going to be safe and not get a burn when you're sliding that lid over the pot, or even when you're taking something out of the oven. I've definitely many times, caught my forearm on the edge of the oven, taking it out. So oven mitts are your friend if you were to have to put out a stovetop fire or for taking something out of the oven. So that story I told you about the woman who went and got distracted by her photo album. So her husband had come in to find the fire on the stovetop. And what he did was try to take that hot flaming pot outside. What happened when he did that was he just grabbed it and he dropped it because it was hot. So then at that point, he had spread flaming hot cooking all over the kitchen, catching the cabinets on fire. And that actually could have been prevented quite potentially, if he had realized he could have slid a lid on the pot, or if he had used the oven mitts to transport that pot outside instead of dropping it on the floor in the home. So they're a really great burn prevention tool, but also a really great safety tool to have on hand if you are trying to respond to a fire that has accidentally started. So use those oven mitts. So those are my kitchen safety fire prevention tips. The next two tips that I'm going to tell you about are two very, very important ones that are important for staying safe at home in general, also if you have a kitchen fire. So the first one is smoke alarms. Smoke alarms are your best friend when it comes to surviving a fire. So we like to say smoke alarms save lives, and it's so true. They really do. So in the fire service, or when I'm teaching, I like to teach about prevention, detection, and escape. Those are like the really three important things that I always try to cover. So we've just talked about the prevention side of things and using the fire triangle, etc. But number two is detection. So detection is those safety devices that exist in our homes that let us know that there is an emergency. Smoke alarms are the most important one. So say, for example, you fell asleep and you had cooking on the stove. You want to know that there is a fire as soon as possible. So smoke alarms are actually legislated in the Ontario Fire Code. It is the law that we have to have working smoke alarms, and we have to have them on every level of our home and outside of sleeping areas. And sleeping areas are not limited to the bedroom. They're anywhere you might doze off. So the living room, the rec room, etc. We need to have working smoke alarms in those places. So to give you a little, background or perspective, in today's homes with lightweight construction and synthetic materials, we have about 3 minutes to escape if there was a fire. So I always tell people, is the fire department going to save you, or is your smoke alarm going to save you? Well, the truth is that with our response boundaries, it could take up to 4 minutes or 4.5 minutes for us to get to a given point. But we have 3 minutes to get outside in today's homes. What's going to save you? Early notification by a smoke alarm that there's an emergency, or the fire department. So that's why these smoke alarms are of the utmost importance. They need to be tested monthly so that we know that they are working. You can test your smoke alarm without your feet ever even having to leave the ground. A broom handle works great. Press that test button. I like to do it kind of the first of the month, so it's consistent and in the habit of doing that. So It is the homeowner's responsibility to make sure that working smoke alarms exist in a residence. So that means if you are renting, it is the landlord's responsibility to make sure this smoke alarm maintenance is happening. If you own your home, it is your responsibility. So in the city, we have an alarm assistance program. So if you are in a position where you're not sure if your home's in compliance or that you're protected as far as smoke alarms are concerned, maybe you don't have somebody or you're not able to change it yourself, that's something, if you're within the city of Brantford, that we can actually come and help you with. And I can provide more information on that to anybody who is interested after the presentation. So smoke alarms, they are your best friend, and I just can't stress that enough. So the second part of this, and the third thing I like to talk about, is escape. How are we going to get outside if there is a fire? And no matter what age you are, I always talk about plan and practice your home fire escape. And this is really important because when we are in a scary situation, like if there was a fire, the emotional part of our brain can sometimes take over the rational part of our brain. So if we've planned our escape and we've identified all the ways out of our home, and we've practiced taking those ways out of our home, we are going to have something to fall back on when we're emotional and we're scared. And it's really important too, because if you practice your escape, you'll be very well aware of how long it takes you and what are the limitations, so that you can make an educated decision on which way to take out in a fire. So we have some home escape planning grids that you can use to plan and practice your escape, but I highly recommend it so that you are well prepared in the event of a fire. If you hear your smoke alarm, how am I going to get outside? And then calling 911 once you are outside. Getting out is always step number one. Say there, a fire started in your kitchen, you weren't able to, put a lid on it or what have you to put it out, get outside. That's the most important thing, and we will come and deal with the fire. So the takeaways from today are prevention. Avoid a fire by keeping the hot things away from the things that can burn. Fire prevention in the kitchen and in your lives in general comes down to having good habits, and that's all those tips I just told you. The third thing is to be prepared in case something goes wrong. Despite our best efforts, fires happen, whether it be in the kitchen, whether it be, something malfunctioning in our house. Otherwise, there are some things that just won't be in our control. But what is within our control is having working smoke alarms and being prepared and knowing how to get outside in the event of a fire. Again, my name is Tegan Knowles. I'm the fire safety educator with the Brantford Fire Department. If you have any questions, we would love to hear from you and answer those questions. fire@brantford.ca is our email. You can email there and it will be directed appropriately. There's also lots of additional information on our website, www.brantfordfire.ca. Or you can give us a call at 519-752-0540 and we will direct your call appropriately. Thank you so much, everyone, for attending. It was my pleasure to be here today. I really hope that I get invited back in the future. And I hope that what I've told you about today will be helpful in fire safety in the kitchen. Thank you very much.